strategist and planner. He's a very influential advisor, particularly in investment. So I want you to give a round of applause to Sean King.
Well, thank you guys, pleasure. And we're going to have 3 panelists. I'm your moderator, and again, I'm Sean. So I'll go ahead and invite the panelists to come up, and then we'll have them introduce themselves here and to you in just a second. But I'm Sean. I'm an attorney, CPA, working as a serial entrepreneur in a couple different businesses, primarily involving insurance, investment advisory, and to some degree blockchain as well. And I'll be hosting this panel, which is a mouthful. The topic we'll be talking about is renewable energy, blockchain, AI, and big data, how technology can disrupt and enhance the way we do business today, and with a particular emphasis on how some of these technologies may benefit Puerto Rico, or how Puerto Rico can exploit some of these technologies to build additional export service businesses or other types of venture capital and entrepreneurial-based businesses here in Puerto Rico. So with that, I'm going to invite the panel to, I'll start here with Michael Terpin on my left to introduce themselves one by one. And if I can, I'm going to ask Lenka to go last because I think she has an introductory video that will provide some context perhaps for some of the future conversation as well. So I think that'll flow better if we do it that way. So Michael, just maybe take a minute.
Sure, I'm Michael Terpin. I'm the founder and CEO of Transform Group, which is a blockchain services company encompassing advisory, public relations, events, and I was the first person to move to Puerto Rico under Act 20 and 22 in early 2016, and have been a big supporter of the
blockchain person.
First blockchain, yes. First blockchain person from the blockchain community. There are about 300 of us now, and I've also put on the first conference on cryptocurrency and blockchain in the Caribbean, Coin Agenda, which happens every year around this time. In fact, it's tomorrow. Coinagenda.com is a discount for people from Puerto Rico. And happy to discuss everything that I think can be done between the communities.
Good. And to the left of you is another Michael.
My name is Michael Acosta. I'm a senior director for Microsoft, covering our data and AI business. I've shared responsibility for our data and AI business across Canada, United States, and Latin America. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. My father was born in Old San Juan. I have aunts and uncles who live in Carolina and Humacao. My grandparents are buried in Bayamón. So although I've never lived in Puerto Rico, it's always been like a second home for me. And it's a real pleasure to be here to talk about how these technologies can help the island continue to move forward.
Welcome home. And Jose.
José Morey. I'm a physician by training. I was born here on the island, Rio Piedras. I grew up in Caguas, left the island when I was young. Went to school in Florida and then got into technology after I finish my medical school. I was a senior or associate vice president, chief health officer for IBM Watson Health, so I was at IBM and developing their AI applications for 5 years. After that, I started working as a consultant for startups as well as for NASA iTech. iTech is an accelerator which is focusing on developing the technologies to not just help us reach deep space, but actually colonize deep space and develop it as an ecosystem for us to thrive and survive there. And I work with several accelerators across the U.S., including MIT, and also several investment banks as well.
Thank you. Finally, Lenka.
Hi, my name is Lenka Somolova. I'm originally from Czech Republic. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Power Orbital. We're a manufacturer of lithium-ion batteries that are, I feel like, the safest on the market right now. So we prepare a video just to lift up the mood a little bit here so you don't fall asleep. So if I can ask for the video, it's a quick introduction of what we do. I believe it explains the best what we're doing.
right, thank you. Well, we will stay with Lenka. Since I made her go last, we'll let her go first when it comes to some of the questions. Lenka, you're obviously involved with power storage, batteries, and that sort of thing. And we saw on the video there, Siberia, even Mars. How can the work that you're doing impact Puerto Rico? How can Puerto Rico take advantage of this type of power storage solutions? How can it deploy it? And maybe how could it build export services perhaps around it in some way?
Sure. So we started talking to Puerto Rico because there is, as obviously all of you know, there is a new plan to electrify the whole island after the hurricane and also the recent earthquake. So with power storages, it's a whole new disruptive field where you can change the industry in terms of we can change the electrification by employing or deploying the mini-grids or microgrids, and we can be fully reliable on a power which is produced either by solar or wind, probably solar in this case more. But without the battery storages, it wasn't possible. So with the lithium-ion batteries cost decreasing, I believe now it's the right time to deploy more and more battery storages and just supplement the solar power, and not only just because the energy by itself is green, but it's been proven that it's also cost effective, as we could see in Germany or Australia, a big Tesla project. And where we come in place is we're a company that, yes, we're making lithium-ion batteries, but we were thinking about it and we said there's a lot of fair amount of companies that make lithium-ion batteries, but lithium by nature is highly flammable. So we were trying to make a solution that would be non-flammable. And as you could see in the video, our batteries, it can be shot with gun, it can be thrown out of a really high building. We did tests like that, and just our solution is non-flammable, so it's highly safe. And in terms of the deploying battery storages for large buildings such as this hotel, you need a safe solution. So that's where we come in place. As well as our solution is fully recyclable. So at the end of the life cycle, we buy back the battery and just fully recycle all the active materials in the battery. So not only it's cost effective, but we're also truly green.
Fantastic. For those in the audience who don't know, I guess it was last year, recently at least, Puerto Rico passed some enabling legislation to allow for microgrids, and in fact to promote microgrids. And there's a lot of innovation going on. There's 3 or 4 different projects that I'm familiar with going on presently, and there are probably far more than that. But Puerto Rico has a really unique opportunity to diversify the grid structure and maybe leapfrog a whole generation of technology and end up being a modern electrical grid, one of the first in the world. I mean, there are other examples, but we can certainly be among them, thanks in part to the technology and the interest that it's brought. So I'm going to ask the next question of Michael Acosta. And Michael, you're involved with big data, artificial intelligence. Can you talk just a little bit about how that technology is already changing the world, ways it might change the world, and maybe a little bit to plug into what we just talked about, how that technology might even interact with microgrids and power management and those sort of things?
Absolutely. I thought the commentary about the cost effectiveness of renewable energy is very important. The cost of renewable energy, of course, has come down significantly, is extraordinarily competitive with legacy fossil fuels, but it's still essential to really optimize the location of some of those resources, be they solar panels or windmills or tidal energy farms, etc. There are, of course, microclimates where you might have a significantly, materially different amount of sunlight in one place compared to 1 or 2 kilometers away. And this is one of the applications of artificial intelligence. We work with customers and partners all over the world the location of those renewable sources of energy, but also until and unless the entire grid is electrified by those renewable energy sources, there will still be legacy power plants online. And so we work with customers who also use artificial intelligence to understand what is the likely capacity of a given set of renewable energy resources, solar panels, windmills, etc. The weather and conditions are variable, and so it's essential as we seek to reestablish what we hope will be the most reliable electrical supply in the world here in the coming years. We need to make sure that we're using technology like artificial intelligence to really accurately predict what is going to be the output of a solar farm, of a windmill, of a tidal energy project, etc., so that we can balance that out with the energy that needs to come from traditional fossil fuel sources for probably another decade or two. The battery storage is, of course, essential. I think we all know that the sun doesn't shine at night, and sometimes the winds die down, etc. So it's this balancing of complex factors, weather, capacity, storage, traditional energy sources, etc. These are very, very complex problems. Microsoft was very proud in November, just about 3 months ago, to host an artificial intelligence event here in Puerto Rico. In fact, this was one of 8 locations in Latin America that we ran it. And the event here in Puerto Rico had the highest attendance as a percentage of the local population. As just a quick comparison, cities like Bogota, Colombia, and Lima, Peru, cities of over 8 million people each in just those cities, had fewer attendees at our artificial intelligence conference than San Juan had. So I think what you see here is a population that is extraordinarily ready, willing, and able to embrace new technologies. Those 984 people who came to our event here represent 984 people ready to start to work on projects that will result in a better electric grid, better quality of life, both here in Puerto Rico and as an export service. Data is portable, and data is the oxygen for artificial intelligence. So if a person has artificial intelligence skills, they can leverage those skills against both local problems and problems elsewhere. I think it would be amazing if Puerto Rico became a real hotbed of artificial intelligence expertise to be used here and as an export service.
And I'm going to pivot to the other Michael now, Michael Terpin. I thought I was one of the earlier people to first talk about Puerto Rico and blockchain and the Acts 2022 incentives, but Michael beat me by at least a few years. And Michael, blockchain, and there may be folks in the audience who really don't understand exactly what that term means. It's still a relatively new term, but it too is playing a large role in Puerto Rico's revival, both in terms of, as you have done, attracting talent and capital here to the island, innovation and startup businesses. But there also may be solutions that blockchain can play in the power grid. For example, if you have situations where you have these microgrids might want to trade power between themselves. And somebody's got to do the accounting for that, and somebody may even need to automatically have artificial intelligence send funds back and forth as you're balancing out the power between these various microgrids. So Michael Terpin, maybe just talk a little bit about the blockchain community here in Puerto Rico, use cases that you're seeing, innovations that you're seeing, how it can both, we can both develop businesses around it here in Puerto Rico, and also how the technology itself might be useful for government or utilities or other things here on the island.
Well, sure. So blockchain essentially is a ledger, and it's a ledger that has permanence and provability. You don't have to go and audit a blockchain. It's self-auditing, whether that's a private, a permissioned, or a public blockchain. And all of them have various use cases. Cryptocurrency is probably the best known use case of a public blockchain. But giant companies like IBM, Microsoft, have really devoted a lot of time and energy trying to find specific use cases around blockchain for things like power grids. And also, blockchain is software as a service, and so it is an export service. So everybody who is coming down to Puerto Rico to start or scale a company, in the blockchain sector, that counts as as the export services under Act 20 and Act 73 and some of the other acts. And so this is a very logical place for companies from San Francisco to New York to go and really develop talent down here. Even if they don't move the corporate headquarters down here, they can have a division. I mean, Microsoft certainly has a lot of people down here, managing. They're not private keys of a blockchain, but the keys for every copy of Microsoft Office in the Americas. And so they've been very early in figuring that out. I'm shocked that Amazon and Google and Facebook don't put their cloud services divisions down here and figure out a way to do that. Yeah, exactly. It's not a secret. I mean, I think we're trying to get companies from all over the place to do that, but I'm obviously focused on the blockchain sector. I speak all over the world, and there are a lot of top entrepreneurial talent, as well as investors who've come down here to start or expand businesses in the blockchain sector.
Perfect. Jose, I know you feel strongly that STEM and STEAM, and maybe you take a moment to define what those terms mean, can play a huge role in remaking Puerto Rico's economy. And I know you're pretty passionate about the potential on the island for STEAM and STEM-based jobs and learning. Could you just talk a little bit about those two concepts, what they are, and why you think Puerto Rico might be particularly well positioned to take advantage of that?
Sure, yeah, thank you. So one of the hats that I wear, I'm part of the Forbes Technology Council, which is kind of a think tank for Forbes, and I get to write a lot and be a contributor online for them. And one of the things that I've been discussing a lot recently, is this concept of Silicon Island. This concept that the island of Puerto Rico, we're at an inflection point. Yes, we have an amazing infrastructure that's here and a lot of things with the ecosystem that's been developing for the last 5 to 10 years around startups, but we have an opportunity now, especially after some of the things that have occurred in the last couple of years, to really remake ourselves in an image that we choose. Really remake ourselves to not just be leaders in the Caribbean, not just to be leaders in Latin America, but be leaders in the world. And if you look at the economies that are leading right now, you look at the Chinese, you look at the US, you look at Israel, these companies or these countries have really pushed the boundaries forward when it comes to startups, when it comes to leading technology, have been focusing a lot on STEM or STEAM, this concept of science, technology, engineering, arts, and math is super important. Everyone that's sitting up here in front of you, that whether it's blockchain or AI or batteries and new types of power, renewable energies, all that come from STEAM. And all of those technologies, all of that, it's the future of every economic and every business ecosystem. And any country or any nation state that wants to be a leader needs to be focusing on this, and needs to be focusing on the education components of this from all aspects. I mean, we're already naturally a perfect environment for it. We have people that are extremely resilient. We've had phenomenal engineering schools, phenomenal medical schools. We have the infrastructure now with places. We saw the whole panel that was up here of female CEOs and Latinas in STEM that are doing things from Piloto to Lindsay, and with her startup at the book startup that she had. All these things are already there, but we need to double down on these things. We need to double down on the education. We already speak Spanish and we already speak English. Those are two natural languages that covers the majority of the world. What if we started teaching coding from an early onset? A lot of companies, a lot of countries are starting to focus on this, looking at coding as a separate language, looking at coding starting from pre-K to K, and then obviously not just extending it into high school and then to college, but even though we may have the infrastructure and the educational components now, we have the talent now, technology is ever evolving. Technology is exponential. AI's been around for 50 years or more. I mean, you can go back to Ada Lovelace in the 1800s to talk about the first algorithms, and then Alan Turing in World War II. We've been teaching AI as a PhD. People have been studying neural networks now for 50 years, but it's only been really in the last 10 to 20 years that it's really come back into the normal nomenclature that we have, that the lay people can talk about. We're starting to see AI affect us in so many ways, right? You see it in the way that it finishes your sentences when you're writing something on Google, or the way it finishes a sentence when you're writing an email, or when it tells you what you're really gonna like on Spotify or Netflix. I mean, we see it in our daily lives, and we're starting to see it in things like autonomous driving. These are the things that we have now, but the future is biomechatronic, it's biomimicry. I think some of the Merrill Lynch gentlemen has talked about the fourth industrial revolution. We've been in that now for about 20 years. We're really now starting to get into new industrial revolutions, and these technologies that are going to be powered by STEM, everyone that's sitting here, everything that's really powering these ecosystems, and the economics of the world today and the economics of the world tomorrow will be powered by leaders that focus on STEM and STEAM. It will be powered by the people that really double down on the education and really open up the floodgates for the innovators that you saw sitting up here previously, and then the folks you have sitting here to my right now. That is the future, and the island has the opportunity to really magnify and exponentially grow today and be a leader for the rest of the world. And you can have people coming down here to start businesses, people that will bring the median income of the average person to 100,000, which is what you're seeing, in a lot of places in the STEM environments. And there's a huge dearth of this right now. That I think the last PwC was talking about in 2016, there was 3 million STEM jobs that were unfilled in the US alone. So we have the opportunity to really leverage the unique place that we hold, and a unique place that we are in our own times, in the island's time, that we can really grow if we really focus on this, and we can really be the next Silicon Island. We can be what's happening in San Francisco and Boston and New York. We can really be leaders in the world if we really focus on where the world is going in STEM and STEAM.
I have a quick point. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful point. And as you think about as an island like Puerto Rico invests in STEM and STEAM, and the average capabilities of people all over the place come up, we're trying to make sure that the obstacles keep coming down. And I think we're going to see an amazing thing happen when you see those two lines meet, where the baseline capabilities of a population have come up and the barriers to entry have come down. A good example of that is we've invested a lot of time in what we call cognitive services. These are artificial intelligence models that you can build from images, video, speech, etc. And there are some amazing things that you can do when you bring artificial intelligence out of the realm of PhDs into the realm of highly educated people and the mainstream. I brought with me a smart camera, and what this is designed to do is enable developers to use the power of the cloud to build a visual model and then deploy that model down to this particular device, which runs about $200. And I'll give you just two very brief use cases for this that are relevant, I think, to some of the previous conversations. Obviously, construction is a huge, huge industry here as the island continues to rebuild. Now, imagine that this device has received a machine learning model that detects when workers are or are not wearing hard hats and eye protection. We can reduce systematically the number of injuries on the job, reduce the amount of time and effort that it takes to administer those things, reduce delays to construction projects because of injuries with devices like this. There was an earlier session that talked about some of the changing demographics and how what percentage of the island is over the age of 60 or 65. These can be deployed in hospitals to detect when a patient is getting up out of bed and shouldn't be, and a nurse can be automatically alerted before that person gets up and turns into a fall or a trip hazard, causing further injury. So as STEM and STEAM education continues to rise and the obstacles, the barriers to entry for things like artificial intelligence come down, we're going to see an absolute avalanche of solutions, and those solutions should be built here, because what I just described to you are artificial intelligence models that can be built with pictures, with video, without necessarily using code. So we're going to see a tremendous avalanche of solutions come to the forefront as these two lines converge.
Agreed. In my view, Puerto Rico's greatest challenge is demographics. I mean, when you look at 15 years ago, this island had over 4 million people, and today we're down to a little over 3 million people. So 25% of your population disappears in 15, 20 years. And with that goes your tax base to some degree. So you built infrastructure, you built a government designed to support 3 million, and a few years later you're 4 million, and a few years later you're down to 3. And all the demographic trends show that before this levels off, unless there are some pretty successful massive interventions, Puerto Rico is going to end up with around a little over 2 million people by the year 2040, I believe it is. I mean, that's sort of the current sort of projection. So one of my big goals is to reverse that trend. One of my big goals is to help bring the diaspora home. One of my big goals is to attract people from all over the world to Puerto Rico, in part because it becomes the very hub that you guys are describing. So I'm going to ask this question of Michael Terpin. Michael, I think you're the only panelist that actually lives here a good part of the time.
Yeah, that has a Puerto Rico driver's license.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. So can you just talk about you've lived in California, you've lived in lots of different places, you've been a successful business person in over and over in many different areas. Can you just talk a little bit about working here in Puerto Rico, and especially working in the tech industry, the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of what that looks like?
Yeah, well, obviously we all became acquainted about Puerto Rico's tax advantages, but as one accountant said, you wouldn't move here if it was Chernobyl, right? So basically, the tax structure allows you to live in one of the most beautiful places in the world with some of the greatest people in the world. I mean, my wife and I have made friends here, I think, much more quickly than we did in Las Vegas when we lived there for a number of years, and new friends on an annual basis more than we did in Los Angeles, where we were for many, many years. I think it's just the warm island culture that has been embraced for hundreds of years, the people who grew up here, the Boricuas, and also embraced by people who come to the island and, start living a little bit on island time, perhaps, for,
It's for real.
It's for real, but when you slow down a little bit, you get to think a lot more deeply in some cases, and this is a great place also just geographically. My firm has I've got 30 people who work for me in different parts of the world, and a couple here, and I want to expand that group here. But we're equidistant this time of year between London and Los Angeles, 4 hours each way. And so it's great to be able to do business with our European clients a lot more easily than I could when I was in Los Angeles. And it's just a great place to be able to do business. San Juan is the only legitimate metro area in the Caribbean. If you don't consider Havana to be particularly livable these days. Look at every place else in the Caribbean. There's really no other place that is a cosmopolitan, city that is multilingual, multicultural, and it's a great place to be able to do business from. It's a great place to be able to, recruit people to, and particularly people from the eastern seaboard. They come down here once and they're like, I'm done with New York winters. And I came from California, where it's, in Las Vegas, where there's no nonstop flights. I think as we develop more and more tech companies, the airlines will say, hey, we need to go in and, get a nonstop from San Francisco. They used to have a nonstop from Los Angeles. And so it's just up to each industry to sort of, have those ties with the place that is currently in need of the people and other advantages that Puerto Rico has.
So, thanks for that. Lenka, did I understand you to say a few minutes ago that after the hurricanes, after maybe the earthquakes, you guys became more engaged here in Puerto Rico than you were before, and maybe you have some specific projects that you're going on here or competing to bid on or what have you? Can you just talk about kind of more precisely what drew your attention here, other than the very obvious, and and maybe some projects that you're working on or that you hope to do here on the island, and what success you've had and what hurdles you've had so far.
Sure. So we've been actually approached by several companies who plan on deploying battery storages, and they were looking for really safe solution. And I heard Puerto Rico. I hear you. I live in Los Angeles, and I was like, well, yeah, I might as well move to Puerto Rico for a while. No, but seriously, it's we've considered. So we're finishing factory in the Czech Republic, and we're moving on to second stage, which would be building a factory in the U.S. So there were several opportunities. We're thinking about mainland as we're thinking about Puerto Rico, because just to give you an idea, there will be more and more factories for either lithium-ion batteries or any chemical compound batteries being built, because just to give you an idea, 6,000 kilowatt hours per capita is energy consumptions. We're building 1.2 gigawatt hour annual production, and it's one factory. Just so you have idea, like how many factories down the road will be deployed or built. So I'm pretty sure if it continues the way it is and we stay with lithium-ion batteries, we finish second factory in the mainland, third factory in the Puerto Rico, plus the assembly line, and then we move on to other states because it will be needed. So that's the plan. We were already talking about especially building the assembly line, and if we raise enough capital, we would consider building a factory as well.
Fantastic. Puerto Rico could definitely benefit from that.
Not that it has anything to do with AI, but my family and I have run our own household in Denver on solar panels for about 10 years, and I have such a great affinity and respect for the companies that are innovating in that particular space. You're working with materials science, you're working with transmission technology, storage technologies. I think it's really the wave of the future, and there are the natural resources here in Puerto Rico, solar, wind, tidal energies are so abundant. I think it's such a natural fit. It's one of those.
Yeah, and it's true. It's just the solar's been here for a really long time, but the problem with the solar and wind, it's not a reliable source of energy. So it had to come with a battery storage or energy storage by itself. It had to complement the green energy, because we need energy when we need it. So solars without battery storages just don't work. It's a need. It's the missing puzzle.
Lenka's technology actually came through the NASA accelerator, so it's something that I'm very familiar with, and something that we vetted from the NASA perspective. So it's something that we'll look into as well. But you talk about the natural resources of the island, but by far, I think anyone that's here, our best natural resource, I would still say, is our people. So if we double down on who we are as a people, if we double down on what we bring to the table, I think that's where we can really stand out at the world stage. And that's why I think focusing on these types of technologies, these futuristic technologies, leveraging who we are as a people, leveraging what the island is, the spirit that we bring, the humanity that we bring to things, the family environment that we bring to things, I think that's really what we end up having and leveraging our greatest advantage. When you speak about bringing people back from the diaspora, you have one of them sitting right in front of you on this panel, right? And that's the concept. I think you're starting to see that, especially in the diaspora. There's pros and cons to it, but the fact that people go out and get an experience and get knowledge, we can start now bringing that knowledge back to the island and moving people back to the island. And if we focus on these new technologies, you look at the countries that are growing, you look at the places that are growing across the US, it's these futuristic technology innovations, it's these STEM and STEAM types of innovations that's bringing the people to move to those places. So you'll have the younger generations who are either just out of school or perhaps have finished their first startup and have sold or have kind of cut their teeth on the FANGs or whatever, those other advanced technology companies that can come here and do that as well. And then everything else will follow. I think it was Mr. Dent earlier today that talked about how the grandparents left, not because they like the kids, but because they like the grandkids. But once you bring those kinds of new jobs back, and you make this you make everything, I think Mr. Federico talked about having a great park and great schools and a great healthcare system. All that revolves around STEM and STEAM. And you bring those people back, the grandparents will come back, the grandchildren will come back. I think that will move things to do exactly what you're looking to do, to bring back the people, to bring back the knowledge base that has kind of left over time.
You know, one other thing is that you don't have to bring an entire company down here to get jobs down here. There are, particularly in the software industries, this is certainly true in blockchain. There are people who've gotten jobs, you know, working as contractors for San Francisco, for London, for Europe. I mean, one of the first people I met on the island who had a full-time job in blockchain was a student at Microgrids who literally just got onto a chat board from a new cryptocurrency that started up in Germany and said, "Hey, I know how to do social media. Do you need anybody to be a community manager?" And he got the job. And in part, he also got paid in cryptocurrency, and that cryptocurrency went up about 100 times in value and became pretty wealthy as a 20-year-old from picking the right horse to run. And but that's the thing about Puerto Rico, is that yes, we're an island, but we're an island in a connected world where you know, as long as we continue to maintain good high-speed internet here, and that's critically important, we're connected to all the information industries in the world, and you know, we can have pockets here of programming, of customer service, of marketing, of all sorts of knowledge industry jobs that you're still dealing with customers who are hundreds, thousands, 10,000 miles away.
Blockchain is portable, data is portable, artificial intelligence models are portable. That's why I think you can solve problems here and elsewhere with talent that's here. I love the story that you were telling about grandparents coming back, etc. My own grandfather left the island in 1942 during World War II, as there was such a labor shortage on the mainland. And he never had more than an 8th grade education. And to think what has taken my family, myself, in just 2 generations, from an 8th grade education, a man who was a laborer all of his working life, to where I've been fortunate to sit in my career, and it's education. It's exactly what you were talking about. The thing that has made a difference in our family, and that will hopefully continue to root us and my kids here to a certain extent, is education. We need to invest more in that.
My grandfather was a car dealer at Caribe Hilton for 36 years. He used to say he worked as long as Christ lived. So that's grandpa for you. But this concept, that's the beautiful thing. We can be. There was another gentleman I talked about. If you look at the Caribbean, you know, this is the island that shines bright. Well, it's not just the Caribbean where we can shine bright. We can shine bright across the world. And that's the beautiful thing about STEM technologies. It's the fact that if we focus on them, we can export that knowledge without actually leaving the island. That's the great thing about being interconnected, and that's the great thing about the future technology and the future STEM and STEAM technology, that we can do that. And then people will also start coming here to get education. People will start coming here to get healthcare. We can start importing those types of industries simply by doubling down on this type of education. You talked about, Mr. Stube again talked about developing the new hospital system with Johns Hopkins, because it's the #1 in the U.S. and the #1 in the world, arguably. Well, in the future it could be we're doing it with Ponce Medical School or with the UP, where we are #1. And people come to us to export our healthcare to other places.
Well, that basically our time is essentially up. I'll just close by thanking the panelists first and foremost. It was a little bit humbling for me, honestly, to be interviewing you guys. So, not a technical guy. If I do anything well, I can kind of spot trends and see some significance out there. And I certainly see a lot of significance in what you guys are doing and in the potential here for Puerto Rico. So. Thank you again. Thanks to the audience, and I think that pretty much wraps things up.